All right, chapter 5. I shall attempt not much of correlation of dates. A mathematic minded positivist, with his delusion that in the intermediate state twice two are four, whereas if we accept continuity, we cannot accept that there are anywhere two things to start with, would search our data for periodicities. It is so obvious to me that the mathematic or the regular is the attribute of the universal that I have not much inclination to look for it in the local. Still, in this solar system as a whole, there is considerable approximation to regularity, or the mathematic so nearly localized that eclipses, for instance, can, with regular high approximation, be foretold, though I have notes that would deflate a little the astronomer's vainglory in this respect, or would if that were possible. An astronomer is poorly paid, uncheered by crowds, considerably isolated. He lives upon his own inflations. Deflate a bear and it couldn't hibernate. The solar system is like every other phenomenon that can be regarded as a whole, or in the affairs of a ward are inferred with by the affairs of the city by which it is a part. City by county, county by state, state by nation, nation by other nations, all nations by climatic conditions by solar circumstances, sun by general planetary circumstances, solar system as a whole by other solar systems, so the hopelessness of finding the phenomena of entirety in the ward of a city. But positivists are those who try to find the unrelated in the ward of a city. In our acceptance, this is the spirit of cosmic religion. Objectively, the state is not realizable in the ward of a city, but if a positivist could bring himself to absolute belief that he had found it, that would be a subjective realization of that which is unrealizable objectively. Of course, we do not draw a positive line between the objective and the subjective, or that all phenomena called things or persons are subjective within one all-inclusive nexus, and that all thoughts within those that are commonly called persons are subjective. It is rather as if intermediateness strove the regularity in the solar system and failed, then generated the mentality of astronomers, and in the secondary expression strove for conviction that failure had been success. I have tabulated all the data of this book, and the great deal besides card system and several proximities thus emphasized have been revelations to me. Nevertheless, it is only the method of theologians and scientists, worst of all, of statisticians. For instance, by the statistic method, I could prove that a black rain has fallen regularly every 7 months somewhere upon this earth. To do this, I'd have to include red rains and yellow rains, but conventionally, I'd pick out the black particles in red substances and in yellow substances and disregard the rest. Then, too, if here and there a black rain should be a week early or month late, that would be acceleration or retardation. This is supposed to be legitimate in working out the periodicities of comets. If black rains or red or yellow rains with black particles in them should not appear at all near some dates, we have not read Darwin in vain. The records are not complete. As to other inferring black rains, they'd be either gray or brown, and for them we'd find other periodicities. Still, I have had to notice the year 1819, for instance. I shall not note them all in this book, but I have records of 31 extraordinary events in 1883. Someone should write a book upon the phenomena of this one year. That is, if books should be written. 1849 is notable for extraordinary falls. so far apart that a local explanation seems inadequate. Not only the Black Rain of Ireland, May 1849, but a red rain in Sicily and a red rain in Wales. Also, it is said, Tim's Yearbook 1850 241, that upon April 18th or 20th, 1849, shepherds near Mount Ararat found a substance that was not indigenous upon areas measuring 8 to 10 miles in circumference. Presumably, it had fallen there. We have already gone into the subject of science and its attempted positiveness and its resistances in that it must have relations of service. It is very easy to see that most of the theoretic science of the 19th century was only a relation of reaction against theologic dogma, and has no more to do with truth than has a wave that bounds back from a shore. Or, if a shop girl, or you, or I, should pull out a piece of chewing gum about a yard long, that would be quite a scientific a performance, as was the stretching of this earth's age several hundred millions of years. All things are not things, but only relations or expressions of relations. But all relations are striving to be the unrelated or have surrendered to and subordinated to higher attempts. So there is a positivist aspect to this relation that is itself only a relation, and that is the attempt to assimilate all phenomena under the materialist explanation, or to formulate a final, no, this is all-inclusive system upon the materialist basis. If this attempt would be realized, that would be the attaining of realness, but this attempt can be made only by disregarding psychic phenomena. For instance, or if science shall eventually give in to the psychic, it would be no more legitimate to explain the immaterial in terms of the material than to explain the material in terms of the immaterial. Our own acceptance is that material and immaterial are of a oneness merging, for instance, in a thought that is continuous with the physical action. That oneness cannot be explained because the process of explaining is the interpreting of something in terms of something else. All explanation is assimilation of something in terms of something else that has been taken as a basis, but in continuity there is nothing that is any more basic than anything else, unless we think that delusion built upon delusion is less real than its pseudo-foundation. In 1829, Tim's Yearbook, 1848-235, in Persia fell a substance that the people said they had never seen before. As to what it was, they had not a notion, but they saw that the sheep ate it. They ground it into flour and made bread, said to have been passable enough, though insipid. That was a chance that science did not neglect. Manna was placed upon a reasonable basis, or was assimilated and reconciled with the system that had ousted the older and less nearly real system. It was said that, likely enough, manna had fallen in ancient times because it was still falling, but that there was no tutelary influence behind it, that it was a lichen from the steppes of Asia Minor, up from one place in a whirlwind and down in another place. In the American Almanac 1833-71, it is said that this substance, unknown to the inhabitants of the region, was immediately recognized by scientists who examined it, and that the chemical analysis also identified it as lichen. This was in the days when chemical analysis was a god. Since then, his devotees have been shocked and disillusioned. Just how a chemical analysis could so botanize, I don't know, but it was chemical analysis who spoke, and spoke dogmatically. It seems to me that the ignorance of inhabitants, contrasting with the local knowledge of foreign scientists, is overdone. If there is anything good to eat within any distance conveniently covered by a whirlwind, inhabitants know of it. I have data of other falls in Persia and Asiatic Turkey of edible substances. They are all dogmatically said to be manna, and manna is dogmatically said to be the species of lichens from the steppes of Asia Minor. The position that I take is that the explanation was evolved in ignorance of the fall of vegetable substances or edible substances in other parts of the world, that it is the familiar attempt to explain the general in terms of the local, that if we shall have data of falls in vegetable substance in, say, Canada or India, they were not of lichens from the steppes of Asia Minor, that, though all the falls in Asiatic Turkey and Persia are sweepingly and conveniently called showers of manna, they have not been even all of the same substance. In one instance, the particles are said to have been seeds, though the completus rendus, the substance that fell in 1841 and 1846, is said to have been gelatinous. In the Bull Science National de Neuchâtel, it is said to have been of something, in lumps the size of a filbert, that had been ground into flour, that of this flour had been made bread, very attractive looking, but flavorless. The great difficulty is to explain segregation in these showers, but deep-sea fishes and occasional falls down to them of edible substances, bags of grain, barrels of sugar, things that have not been whirled up from one part of the ocean bottom in storms or submarine disturbances, and topped somewhere else. I suppose one thinks, but grain in bags never have fallen. Objects of Amherst, its covering like milled cloth, or barrels of corn lost from a vessel would not sink, but a host of them clashing together after a wreck they burst open, the corn sinks, or does when saturated, the barrel staves float longer. If there be not an overhead traffic of commodities similar to our own commodities carried over this earth's oceans, I am not the deep sea fish I think I am. I have no data other than the mere suggestion that the Amherst object of bags or barrels, but my notion is that bags and barrels from the wreck on one of this earth's oceans would, by the time they reach the bottom, no longer be recognizable as bags or barrels. That, if we have data of the fall of fibrous material that may have been cloth or paper or wood, we shall be satisfactory and grotesque enough. Proc Royal Irish Academy 1-379. In the year 1686, some workmen who had been fetching water from a pond 7 German miles from Memel, on returning to their work after dinner, during which there had been a snowstorm, found the flat ground around the pond covered with coal-black leafy mass, and a person who lived near said he had seen it fall like flakes with the snow. Some of these flake-like formations were as large as a tabletop. The mass was damp and smelt disagreeably like rotten seaweed, but when dried the smell went off. It tore fibrously like paper. Classic explanation. Up from one place and down in another. But what went up from one place in a whirlwind? Of course, our intermediate acceptance is that had this been the strangest substance conceivable from the strangest other world that could be thought of, somewhere upon this earth there must be a substance similar to it, or from which it would, at least subjectively or according to description, not be easily distinguishable, or that everything in New York City is only another degree or aspect of something or combination of things in a village of Central Africa. The novel is a challenge to vulgarization. Write something that looks new to you. Someone will point out that the thrice accursed Greeks said it long ago. Existence is appetite, the gnaw of being, the one attempt of all things to assimilate all other things if they have not surrendered and submitted to some higher attempt. It was cosmic that these scientists who had surrendered to the submitted to the systematic system, god dang it, scientific system, should constantly, with the principles of that system, attempt to assimilate the substance that fell at Memel with some known terrestrial product. At the meeting of the Royal Irish Academy, it was brought out that there is a substance of rather rare occurrence that has been to form in thin sheets upon marsh land. It looks like greenish felt, the substance of memel, damp, coal black, leafy mass. But if broken up, the marsh substance is flake like and it tears fibrously. An elephant can be identified as a sunflower. Both having long stems, a camel is indistinguishable from a peanut, if only their humps be considered. Trouble with this book is that we'll end up a lot of intellectual ruse. We'll be incapable of being astonished with anything. We knew, to start with, that science and imbecility are continuous. Nevertheless, so many expressions of the merging point are at first startling. We did think that Professor Hitchcock's performance in identifying the Amherst phenomenon as a fungus was rather notable as scientific vaudeville. If we acquaint him of nope, if we acquit him of the charge of seriousness, or that in a place where fungi were so common that before a given evening two of them sprang up, only he, a stranger in this very fungiferous place, knew a fungus when he saw something like a fungus. If we disregard its quick lidification, for instance, man, this is a tough book to read out loud. The run-on sentences, lots of run-on sentences, lots of commas that need to be periods. So I understand if no one watches this, but I'm going to do this book. I'm going to test out different cadence and different things. If you happen to be listening, feel free to, what's the word? Criticize. Positive? Not positive. I can't even think of the word. My brain is mush trying to figure this out. But it makes sense when I'm reading it, but damn is it hard to put out. Anyways, where the fuck was I? Oh yeah. It was only nope. For a given evening, two of them sprang up. Only he, a stranger in this very fungiferous place, knew a fungus when he saw something like a fungus. If we disregard its quick liquefaction, for instance, it was only a monologue. However, now we have an all-star cast, and they're not only Irish, they're Royal Irish. The Royal Irishman excluded coal blackness and included fibrousness. So then that this substance was marsh paper, which had been raised into the air by storms of wind and had again fallen. Second act. It was said that, according to Mr. Ehrenberg, the meteor paper was found to consist partly of vegetable matter, chiefly of conifervae. Third act. Meeting of the Royal Irishman, chairs, tables, Irishmen. Some flakes of marsh paper were exhibited. The composition was chiefly of conifervae. This was a double inclusion, or it's the method of agreement that logicians make so much of. So no logician would be satisfied with identifying a peanut as a camel because both have humps. He demands accessory agreement, that both can live a long time without water, for instance. Now, it's not so very unreasonable, at least to the free and easy vaudeville standards, that throughout this book we are considering to think that a green substance could be snatched up from one place in a whirlwind and fall as a black substance somewhere else. But the Royal Irishman excluded something else, and it is a datum that was as accessible to them as it is to me. That according to Cialdini, this was no little local deposition that was seen to occur by some indefinite person living near a pond somewhere. It was a tremendous fall from a vast sky area. Likely enough, all the marsh paper in the world could not have supplied it. At the same time, the substance was falling in great quantities in Norway and Pomerania, or see Kirkwood, Meteoric Astronomy, page 66. Substance like charred paper fell in Norway and other parts of northern Europe, January 31st, 1686. Or a whirlwind with a distribution as wide as that would not acceptably, I should say, have so specialized in that in the rare substance called marsh paper. There'd have been falls of fence rails, roofs of houses, parts of trees. Nothing is said of the occurrence of a tornado in northern Europe in January 1686. There is record only of this one substance having fallen in various places. Time went on, but the conventional determination to exclude data of all falls to this earth except of substances of this earth and of ordinary meteoric matter strengthened. Annals of Philosophy 16 68. The substance that fell in January 1686 is described as a mass of black leaves, having the appearance of burnt paper, but harder and cohering and brittle. Marsh paper is not mentioned, and there is nothing said of the conifer vey, which seemed so convincing to the Royal Irishman. Vegetable composition is disregarded quite as it might be by someone who might find it convenient to identify a crook-necked squash as a big fishhook. Meteorites are usually covered with a black crust, more or less scale-like. The substance of 1686 is black and scale-like. If so be convenience, leaf-like is scale-likeness. In this attempt to assimilate with the conventional, we are told that the substance is a mineral mass, that it is like the black scales that cover meteorites. The scientist who made this identification was von Grotthus. He had appealed to the god chemical analysis, the power and glory of mankind, with which we're not always so impressed, but the gods must tell us what we want them to tell us. We see again that, through nothing has identity of its own, anything can be identified as anything. Or there's nothing that is not reasonable if one snoopeth not into its exclusions. But here the conflict did not end. Berzelius examined the substance. He could not find nickel in it. At that time, the presence of nickel was the positive test of meteoric matter. Whereupon, with a supposititious supposititious positive standard of judgment against him, von Grotthus revoked his identification. Annals of Mag of National History 1-3-185. This equalization of eminences permits us to project with our own expression, which otherwise would be subdued in invisibility. That is it. That it's too bad that no one ever looked to see hieroglyphics, something written upon these sheets of paper. If we have no very great variety of substance that have fallen to this earth, if upon this earth's surface there is infinite variety of substances detachable with whirlwinds, to falls of such a rare substance as marsh paper would be remarkable. A writer in the Edinburgh Review 87-194 says that at the time of writing, he had before him a portion of a sheet of 200 square feet of a substance that had fallen at Karelath, Silesia in 1839, exactly similar to cotton felt, of which clothing might have been made. The god microscopic examination had spoken. The substance consisted chiefly of Coniferae. Jur Asiatic Sock of Bengal, 1847 PT 1-193. That March 16th, 1846, about the time of the fall of edible substance in Asia Minor, an olive gray powder fell at Shanghai. Under the microscope, it was seen to be an aggregation of hairs of two kinds, black ones and rather thick white ones. They were supposed to be mineral fibers, but when burned, they gave out the common anatomical smell of smoke and burnt hair of feathers. The writer described the phenomenon as a cloud of 3,800 square miles of fibers, alkali, and sand. In the postscript, he says that other investigators with more powerful microscopes gave opinion that fibers were not hairs, that the substance consisted chiefly of conifer vey. It's CONIFERV and that AE that's connected. It's conifer vey to me. Or the pathos of it perhaps, or the dull and uninspired but courageous persistence of the scientific. Everything seemingly found out is doomed to be subverted by more powerful microscopes and telescopes, by more refined, precise searching means and methods, the new pronouncements irrepressibly bobbing up, the reception always the truth, at last always the illusion of the final, very little of the intermediate spirit. That the new that has displaced the old will itself some day be displaced, that it too will be recognized as myth stuff. But that the phantoms climb spooks of ladders are good enough for them. Annual Register 1821-681. That according to the report by M. Lane, French consul at Paranabaku, early in October 1821, there was a shower of a substance resembling silk. The quantity was as tremendous as might be a whole cargo lost somewhere between Jupiter and Mars, having drifted around perhaps for centuries, the original fabric slowly disintegrating. In Annals de Chimie 2-15-427, it is said that samples of this substance were sent to France by M. Lane, and that they proved to have some resemblances to silky filaments which, at certain times of the year, are carried by the wind near Paris. In the Annals of Philosophy, NS 12-93, there is a mention of a fibrous substance like blue silk that fell near Nuremberg, March 23, 1665. According to Caldani, Annals of Chimie, 2-31-264, the quantity was so great he places a question mark before the date. One of the advantages of intermediatism is that in the oneness of quasiness there can be no mixed metaphors. Whatever is acceptable at anything is, in some degree or aspect, acceptable of everything. So it is quite proper to speak, for instance, of something that is as firm as a rock and that sails in a majestic march. The Irish are good monists. They have, of course, been laughed at for their keener perceptions. So it's a book we're writing, or it's a procession, or it's a museum with the chamber of horrors rather overemphasized. A rather horrible correlation occurs in the Scientific American, 1859-178. What interests us is that the correspondent saw a silky substance fall from the sky. There was an aurora borealis at the time. He attributes the substance to the aurora. Since the time of Darwin, the classic explanation has been that all silky substances that fall from the sky are spider-like webs. In 1832, aboard the Beagle, at the mouth of La Plata River, 60 miles from land, Darwin saw an enormous number of spiders of the kind usually known as gossamer spiders, little aeronauts that cast out filaments by which the wind carries them. It's difficult to express that silky substances that have fallen to this earth were not spider webs. My own acceptance is that spider webs are the merger, that there have been falls of externally derived silky substance and also of the webs or strands, rather of aeronautic spiders indigenous to this earth, that in some instances it is possible to distinguish one from the other. Of course, our expression upon silky substances will merge away into expressions upon other seeming textile substances, and I don't know how much better off we'll be, except that its fabrical materials have fallen from the sky. Simply to establish acceptance of that may be doing well enough in this book of first and tentative explorations. In All the Year Round, 8-254, is described a fall that took place in England September 21st, 1741, in the towns of Bradley, Selborne, and Aldershirford, and in a triangular space included by these three towns. The substance is described as cobwebs, but it fell like a flake formation, or in flakes or rags about 1 inch broad and 5 or 6 inches long. Also, these flakes were of relatively heavy substance. They fell with some velocity. The quantity was great. The shortest side of the triangular space is 8 miles long. In the Wernerian National Historic Society Trans something 5-386, it is said that there were 2 falls. day were some hours apart, a datum that is becoming familiar to us, a datum that cannot be taken into the fold unless we find it repeated over and over and over again. It is said that the second fall lasted from 9 o'clock in the morning until night. Now, the hypothesis of the classic, that what we call intelligence is only an expression of an equilibrium, that when mental adjustments are made, intelligence ceases, or, of course, that intelligence is the confession of ignorance. If you have intelligence upon any subject, that is something you're still learning. If we agree that which is learned is always mechanically done, in quasi terms, of course, because nothing is ever finally learned. It was decided that this substance was spider's web. That was adjustment. But it's not adjustment to me, so I'm afraid I shall have some intelligence in this matter. If I ever arrive at adjustment upon this subject, then, upon this subject, I shall be able to have no thoughts except routine thoughts. I haven't yet quite decided absolutely everything, so I'm able to point out that this substance was of a quantity so enormous that it attracted wide attention when it came down, that it would have been equally noteworthy when it went up, that there is no record of anyone in England or elsewhere having seen tons of spider webs going up September 1741. Further confession of intelligence upon my part, that if it be contested, then that the place of origin may have been far away, but still terrestrial. Then it's that other familiar matter of incredible marksmanship, again hitting a small triangular space for hours, interval of hours, then from 9 in the morning until night, same small triangular space. These are the disregards of the classic explanation. There is no mention of spiders having been seen to fall, but a good conclusion is that, though this substance fell in a good-sized flakes of considerable weight, it was viscous. In this respect, it was like cobwebs. Dogs nosing it on grass were blindfolded with it. This circumstance does strongly suggest cobwebs, unless we can accept that in regions aloft there are vast viscous or gelatinous areas, and that things passing through become daubed. Or perhaps we clear up the confusion in the descriptions of the substance that fell in 1841 and 1846 in Asia Minor, described in one publication as gelatinous and in another as cereal, that it was a cereal that had passed through a gelatinous region, that the paper-like substance of memel may have had such an experience may be indicated in the Edinburgh found in its gelatinous matter, which he calls Gnostic. Annals of Mag of National History 1-3-185. Scientific American 45-337. Fall of a substance described as cobwebs later part of October 1881 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and other towns. Other towns mentioned are Green Bay, Vesburg, Fort Howard, Sheboygan, and Ozuki. Aeronautic spiders are known as gossamer spiders because of the extreme lightness of the filaments that they cast out to the wind. Of the substance that fell in Wisconsin, it is said, in all instances, the webs were strong in texture and very white. The editor says, curiously enough, there is no mention of any of the reports that we have seen of the presence of spiders. So our attempt to divorce a possible external product from its terrestrial merger, then our joy of the prospector who thinks he's found something. The Monthly Weather Review 26-566 quotes the Montgomery, Alaska, advertiser that upon November 21, it's got to be Alabama because his book, we didn't have Alaska, that upon November 21, 1898, numerous batches of spider web-like substances fell in Montgomery in strands and in occasional masses several inches long and several inches broad. According to the writer, it was not spider's web, but something like asbestos. Also, it was phosphorescent. The editor of the review says that he sees no reason for doubting that these masses were cobwebs. La Nature, 1883-342. correspondent writes that he sends a sample of the substance said to have fallen at Montessuin, Gironde, October 16, 1883. According to a witness quoted by the correspondent, a thick cloud accompanied by rain and a violent wind had appeared. This cloud was composed of a woolly substance in lumps the size of a fist, which fell to the ground. The editor, Tissandier, says of this substance that it was white, but was something that had been burned. It was fibrous. M. Tissandier astonishes us by saying that he cannot identify this substance. We thought that anything could be identified as anything. He can say only that the cloud in question must have been an extraordinary conglomeration. Annual Register 1832-447. That March 1832 there fell in the fields of Koronov, Russia, a combustible yellowish substance covering at least 2 inches thick, an area of 600 to 700 square feet. It was resinous and yellow, so one inclines to the conventional explanation that it was pollen from pine trees. But when torn, it had a tenacity of cotton. When placed in water, it had a consistency of resin. This resin had the color of amber, was elastic like India rubber, and smelled like prepared oil mixed with wax. So in general, our notion of cargoes and our notion of cargoes of food supplies. In Philosophical Transactions 19-224 is an extract from a letter by Mr. Robert Vans in Kilkenny, Ireland, dated November 15th, 1695, that there had been of late in the countries of Limerick and Tipperary showers of a sort of matter like butter or grease, having a very stinky smell. There follows an extract from a letter by the Bishop of Clayton upon a very odd phenomenon, which was observed in Munster and Leinster, that for a good part of the spring of 1695 there fell a substance which the country people called butter, soft, clammy, and dark, and of a dark yellow. The cattle fed indifferently in fields where this substance lay. It fell in lumps as big as the end of one's finger. It had a strong ill scent. His Grace calls it a stinking dew. In Mr. Van's letter, it is said that the butter was supposed to have medicinal properties and was gathered in pots and other vessels by some of the inhabitants of this place. And in all the following volumes of Philosophical Transactions, there is no speculation upon this extraordinary subject. Ostracism. Can't say that word. Ostracism. That's the word. The fate of this datum is a good instance of damnation, not by denial and not by explaining it away, but by simple disregard. The fall is listed by Chadani and is mentioned in other catalogs, but from the absence of all inquiry and of all but formal mention, we see that it has been under excommunication as much as was ever anything by the preceding system. The datum has been buried alive. It is irreconcilable with the modern system of dogmas as ever were geologic strata and vermiform appendix with the preceding system. If intermittently, or for a good part of the spring, the substance fell into Irish provinces, and nowhere else, we have, stronger than before, a sense of stationary region overhead, or a region that receives products like this Earth's products, but from external sources, a region in which this Earth's gravitational and meteorological forces are relatively inert. And for many weeks, a good part of this substance did hover before finally falling. We suppose that in 1685, Mr. Vans and the Bishop of Cloyne could describe what they saw as well as could witness in 1885. Nevertheless, it is going back far. We shall have to have many modern instances before we can accept. As to other falls, or another fall, it is said that the American Journal of Science 1-28- 361 that April 11th, 1832, about a month after the fall of the substance of Koronov, fell a substance that was wine yellow, transparent, soft, and smelling like rancid oil. Mr. Herman, a chemist who examined it, named it sky oil. For analysis and chemic reactions, see the journal. The Edinburgh New Philosophical Journal 13-368 mentions an unctuous substance that fell near Rotterdam in 1832. In Comptes Rendus 13-215, there is an account of an oily reddish matter that fell in Genoa, February 1841, whenever it may have been. Altogether, most of our difficulties are problems that we should leave to later developers of supergeography, I think. A discoverer of America should leave Long Island to someone else. If there be, plying back and forth from Jupiter and Mars and Venus, superconstructions that are sometimes wrecked, we think of fuel as well as cargoes. Of course, the most convincing data would be of coal falling from the sky. Nevertheless, one does not suspect that oil-burning engines were discovered ages ago in more advanced worlds. But, as I say, we should leave something to our disciples. So we'll not especially wonder whether these butter-like or oily substances were food or fuel. So we'll merely note that in Scientific American 24-323, is an account of hail that fell in the middle of April 1871 in Mississippi, in which was a substance described as turpentine, something that tasted like orange water in hailstones about the 1st of June 1842 near Nimes, France, identified as nitric acid. Journal de Pharmacie 1845-273. Hail and ashes in Ireland, 1755, Scientific America 5-168. That at Elizabeth, New Jersey, June 9th, 1874, fell hail in which June 9th, 1874, fell hail in which was a substance said by Professor Leeds of Stevens Institute to be carbonate of soda. Scientific America 30-262. We're getting a little away from the lines of our composition, but it will be an important point later that so many extraordinary falls have occurred with hail. Or, if they were of substances that had origin upon some other part of this earth's surface, had the hail too that origin. Our acceptance here will depend upon the numbers of instances. Reasonably enough, some of the things that fall to this earth should coincide with falls of hail. As to vegetable substances in quantities so great as to suggest lost cargoes, we have a note in the Intellectual Observer 3-468 that upon the 1st of May 1863 a rain fell in Perpignan, bringing down with it red substance, which proved an examination to be a red meal mixed with fine sand. At various points along the Mediterranean, this substance fell. There is in Philosophical Transactions 16-281 an account of a seeming cereal said to have fallen in Wiltshire in 1686, said that some of the wheat fell enclosed in hailstones, but the writer in Transactions says that it had examined the grains and that they were nothing but seeds of ivory berries dislodged from holes and chinks where birds had hidden them. If birds still hide ivy seeds, and if winds still blow, I don't see why the phenomenon has not repeated in more than 200 years since. Well, the red matter in rain in Siena, Italy, May 1830, said by Arago to have been vegetable matter. Arago, some word, 12-468. Somebody should collect data of falls at Siena alone. In the Monthly Weather Review 29-465, a correspondent writes that upon February 16, 1901, at Paw Paw, Michigan, upon a day that was so calm that his windmill did not run, fell a brown dust that looked like vegetable matter. The editor of the review concludes that this was no widespread fall from a tornado because it had been reported from nowhere else. Rancidness, putridity, decomposition, a note that has been struck many times. In a positive sense, of course, nothing means anything, or everything means. Or everything meaning. In a positive sense, of course, nothing means anything, or everything meaning is continuous with all other meanings, or that all evidences of guilt, for instance, are just as good evidences of innocence, but this condition seems to mean things lying around among the stars a long time. Horrible disaster in the time of Julius Caesar remains from it not reaching this earth till the time of the Bishop of Cloyon. We leave to later research the discussion of bacterial action and decomposition, and whether bacteria could survive in what we call space, of which we know nothing. Chemical News 35-183, Dr. A.T. Machadi, F.C.S. writes that at London, Ontario, February 24th, 1868, in a violent storm, fell with snow a dark-colored substance, estimated at 500 tons over a belt 50 miles by 10 miles. It was examined under a microscope by Dr. Machadi, who found it to consist mainly of vegetable matter far advanced in composition. The substance was examined by Dr. James Adams of Glasgow, who gave his opinion that it was the remains of cereal. Dr. Machadi points out that for months before this fall, the ground narrowly remote origin has to be thought of. Dr. Machadi thinks of origin to the south. However, he says this is mere conjecture. American Journal Science, 1841-40. That March 24th, 1840, during a thunderstorm at Rajkik, India, occurred a fall of grain. It was purported by Colonel Sykes of the British Association that natives were greatly excited because it was grain of a kind of unknown to them. Usually comes forward as a scientist who knows more of the things that natives know best than the natives know, but it so happens that the usual thing was not done definitely in this instance. The grain was shown to some botanists who did not immediately recognize it, but thought it to be either spartanum or vica. Fuck that book. That book is a tough book for me to read. I'm going to fight this book. I'm going to read the whole fucking thing. I don't care. This cocksucker is 1,100 pages plus. It's going to take me forever. I don't give a shit if you fucking listen, and I don't give a shit if I sound like I'm fighting a book, because I'm fighting a fucking book because it's interesting and I like it, but it's fucking wordy. Fuck.